This is the big one, folks. Our second annual MMA Dive Awards will build on last year's with more categories, more winners, more losers, and hopefully more controversy as we well and truly fail to leave you all satisfied. With 18 categories this year and 18 different awards to give out, I think we'd best just get straight into it. So without further ado, welcome to the MMA Dive Awards 2021 edition. Personality of the Year. The Personality of the Year award goes to the fighter, the analyst, or just the general presence within the MMA world that really left their mark this year. For me, while there were of course many standouts in all areas, my own personal pick goes for the rising heavyweight contender that is Tai Tuivasa. Look, you can cite dozens of fighters who had better sound bites or brought more in-octagon flair to the table, but in 2021, only one man was able to follow up 3 brutal knockouts with his own personal signature celebration, the Shoey. That for me puts the art in mixed martial arts, and I just found so much enjoyment in watching this man wheeling away in celebration after just stiffening someone, before then going to drink several beers out of several shoes. And just in general, Tai Tuivasa seems like a good dude. He hit a 3-fight skid a few years back that had many people writing him off, and now, with 4 straight shoeys, knockouts, we're beginning to see this guy's potential as a star and as a contender within the heavyweight division. Dud of the Year. There is nothing quite like a total dud to make you feel cheated out of a viewing experience. And I know not to rag on these guys too much for not entertaining us, given the risks involved in this sport, but sometimes fights are just so crazily bad, especially when they're billed as something a lot more, that it really leaves us feeling quite empty afterwards. And for my money, no fight served up more of a head scratcher than the surefire barn burner that seemed destined to take home fight of the night, Thiago Santos versus Johnny Walker. I just left that fight after watching John Kavanagh and SPG's coaching, wondering whether we were seeing one of MMA's biggest wild men actively being taught how to dull his edge, and that made me a bit sad. And of course Santos, who's a wild man in his own right, didn't help. But yeah, I just felt like this bout deserved a mention, because for a lack of a better way of putting it, it kinda sucked. Breakout Fighter of the Year. Another difficult category up next, or well, I suppose they're all difficult categories for the most part. The Breakout Fighter of the Year will go to the man or woman who made us seriously aware of them and their potential over the course of the last 365 days. The fighter who started the year in one place and ended it in another spot entirely. And again, this is going to be a category that divides people straight down the middle. But as far as I saw it, no athlete this year has managed to elevate himself further than Ciryl Gane. Though his 2020 was capped off by a finish of the former champion Junior Dos Santos, his trio of wins in 2021 elevated him to another level entirely, where we're now calling him the single most technical striker in heavyweight history, a man who a surprising amount of experts are picking to defeat the fearsome Francis Ngannou. And I know there have been a lot of breakout fighters who could have made the cut here, but for me, Gane has injected his presence into a division that needed a fight like this. And when you consider that heavyweight has historically always been the most significant belt in the sport, even though it's been struggling in recent years, seeing a contender like him emerge is enough to get my vote. Upset of the Year. Out of all of the categories listed here, the Upset of the Year is certainly one of the more straightforward picks. How can we even give a mention to any fighter other than Juliana Pena and her stunning defeat of Amanda Nunes? She didn't just play it safe either. Pena took the fight to the champion in a way that just didn't make sense. It still doesn't make sense. There was a confidence to the way she willingly stepped into the fire with the fearsome power of Nunes, and by the time the second round reached its midway point, Juliana looked totally destined to win. It was an upset that deserves its place within the top 3 or 4 in UFC history, and for that reason, as far as these categories are concerned, it's definitely one of the bigger gaps between eventual winner and nominees we've had this year. The Mr. or Miss Viral Insanity Award. This next prestigious award is one that I came up with to account for those moments in 2021 that warranted about 20 consecutive rewatches. Those clips that left us wondering what the hell we had just witnessed. Okay, if I'm being totally honest, this award's entire existence can be boiled down to me just wanting to honor the remarkable entrance, knockout, and celebration turned in by the hulking heavyweight that is Chris Barnett, because to this day, I find myself going back and watching his spinning wheel kick knockout of Gian Villante with a certain childish glee. He danced to the octagon, he pulled off a finish for the ages, one that seemed to defy his physical frame, although if you know anything about Chris Barnett, you'll know that appearances can be deceiving, before he then capped it off with a front flip into into a sitting celebration. Bravo, Huggy Bear. Bravo indeed. Event of the year. And following on from the Mr. or Miss Viral Insanity Award comes the Event of the Year nod, which has to go to the event that gave us Chris Barnett's stunning victory. UFC 268 was such an amazing night of fights. You had 6 straight knockouts on the prelims, which included Barnett's Magic, Alex Pereira's debut flying knee, Chris Curtis, Bobby Green, the debut of Ian Gary. Then came the instant classic Insanity of Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler, and then a barn burner between Shane Burgos and Billy Quarantillo that the fans were literally too exhausted to properly cheer for after Gaethje Chandler. Marlon Vera brought us a bittersweet finish of Frankie Edgar before the back-to-back title matchups between Rose Namajunas and Weili Zhang, and of course the main event grudge match between Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington. UFC 268, in other words, was totally awesome. Coach of the Year. Another relatively simple pick for the Coach of the Year award, as Trevor Whitman's trio of standout pupils all managed to have excellent years. Kamaru Usman, Rose Namajunas, and Justin Gaethje all featured on UFC 268 and managed to come away with hugely impressive wins. And yeah, though Whitman was no doubt having one of the most busy and stressful nights of his career, 2021 overall was another stellar year for this excellent mind for the sport. Villain of the Year. The villain of the year isn't always the guy who manages to blur the lines between being a personality in the sport and having some very real troubles. John Jones, we're looking at you. It doesn't even necessarily need to be the most obvious heel figures in the sport, guys like Colby Covington or Conor McGregor, although Conor was definitely a close second here. But for my money, Paulo Costa's complete and utter disregard for the contract he signed prior to fighting Marvin Vettori, the sheer audacity of his unwillingness to make weight, especially after he alienated his fans in 2020 through his bottle of wine excuse. Yeah, even if his awesome performance in the matchup against Vettori proved a lot of people wrong, I do have to side with Borrachinha for this one. He played the villain role like he was born to. MMA Moment of the Year. There's nothing quite like a late career resurgence, and for our MMA Moment of the Year award, there was no single victory inside the octagon that completely messed with our expectations more than Glover Teixeira's dominant victory over Jan Blachowicz at UFC 267. If you want to look for a display all year that would have inspired fighters all over the globe, this one was it. At 42, 7 years removed from his first shot at UFC gold, Teixeira did the unthinkable by carving out a 5-fight win streak to find his way back into the cage with a reigning champion. And despite Jan being the favourite, understandably so, Glover went out there and made it his fight, becoming the oldest first-time champion in UFC history. A stunning showcase from a truly inspiring veteran. Most improved fighter. You're only really as good as your last fight, something we often forget when assessing any given fighter's ceiling. And like many of you, I've certainly been guilty of underestimating just how much these athletes can improve year by year. And as far as 2021 is concerned, no fighter managed to shut me up more than Charles Oliveira. Not that I didn't think he was already talented as hell. He has the records to prove that. But fight by fight, Do Bronx just started to look the part. Started to look like the most well-rounded fighter in the division. He opened his year's account by winning UFC gold through a knockout of the fearsome Michael Chandler, before then upsetting the odds with a masterful win over Dustin Poirier. The vast majority of us are all guilty of putting this man in a box, and given that expectation and how he rose beyond it, I honestly couldn't be happier for the guy. Performance of the year. If you want to talk about a performance that has aged well, as if it even needed to, then Max Holloway's stunning 5-round destruction of Calvin Kattar looks even better this week than it did when he originally pulled it off. Kattar has earned the respect of the MMA world through his unbelievable rebound win against the heavily favoured Giga Chikadze, but it says a lot about the sheer mastery of 2021's greatest performance in how we were so certain that he would never be the same. Holloway managed to break multiple records through his high-volume destruction of Kattar, and capped it off with a viral moment for the ages, declaring himself mid-fight to be the best boxer in the UFC in a show of bravado that will live on decades from now. As far as I saw it, no performance in UFC history was quite like the one turned in by Bless that night. Comeback of the Year. The Comeback of the Year award is always good fun. No matter who you're supporting in any given fight, it's hard not to be moved by a fighter's sudden ability to completely subvert your expectations, to drag themselves into the winning position on the brink of defeat. There were a lot of entries this year that could have pipped our eventual winner to the post, but no fight managed to hit this nail on the head as perfectly as Sergio Pettis and his spinning backfist knockout of Kyoji Horiguchi to defend his Bellator bantamweight title. Pettis was getting whooped from pillar to post for an overwhelming amount of the fight, and though his surname would suggest otherwise, he's never been the finisher that Anthony is. Horiguchi is a true master, and personally, I still think he's one of the best 5 bantamweights in the sport. I'd even favour him to run through Pettis in the rematch, but for what it's it's worth, this was one of the wildest comebacks you will ever see. A comeback that had no right to happen. Round of the year. A lot can happen in 5 short minutes. And in the most thrilling of contests, that 300 seconds can seem like an absolute eternity. So for our Round of the Year award, I can't look any further than the 3rd round of the featherweight title showdown between Alexander Volkanovski and Brian Ortega, because that 5-minute period was nothing short of insane. Ortega is one of the snappiest, most dangerous submission threats the octagon has ever known, and though Volkanovski was picking him apart, once a major momentum swing occurred, T-City latched onto a pair of extremely dangerous submissions that somehow, someway, weren't enough to force the tap. To make matters even crazier, Volkanovski slipped out of Ortega's second attempt and began raining down on him with some nasty revenge-laden ground and pound. Thrilling doesn't do this round justice. This was absolutely scintillating stuff. Submission of the year. Though the submission of the year category is always an interesting one, this year I found it to be one of the easiest picks of the lot. Not to say that there wasn't some legitimate competition for the throne, but when you make the audacious prediction that you're going to submit one of MMA's all-time greatest BJJ fighters, and then you go out there and actually do it, yeah, I'm sold. And for Andre Muniz, breaking the legendary Jacare Souza's arm in 2 after what seemed like some pretty mindless trash talking was just crazy to watch. Sure, Jacare is pretty old, but that really shouldn't have happened, and the fact that it did made this pick as concrete as can be. Knockout of the year. What exactly is the overall purpose of a knockout finish? I'm not trying to be condescending when I ask that, I just wanted to frame my criteria here. The knockout, or any finish for that matter, allows the fighter who scores it to take the judges out of the equation, to ensure that all that preceded it from a competitive standpoint is totally irrelevant when assessing the result of the fight. And sure, they also look great, but for my own pick, I wanted to balance the impact of the knockout on the fight in question with the aesthetic value of what we saw. And again, though it has already been mentioned, I'm going with Sergio Pettis' spinning backfist knockout of Kyoji Horiguchi. Not only are spinning techniques a rarity at the highest level when it comes to finishes, but to do it in a world title fight that you've been losing so heavily. Yeah, this was a special one. Female Fighter of the Year. I know there will likely be some disagreement on this one, given the sheer weight of what Juliana Pena managed to achieve through her victory over Amanda Nunes. But if the criteria for Fighter of the Year is boiled down to strength of schedule over a 365-day period, I do think that 2 great wins are sometimes better than 1. And I know that might be overly simplistic, but when you become the first fighter in women's MMA history to recapture a UFC title, and you do it in the first round, yeah, Rose Namajunas through that win, and her subsequent victory over Weili Zhang in the rematch, that is enough in my book to make her case quite solid. Male Fighter of the Year. The Male Fighter of the Year award was pretty straightforward for me. I do think that Charles Oliveira deserves a mention, but with 3 victories and 2 excellent finishes, Kamaru Usman well and truly stole the show in a year that saw him conclusively stamp down his reputation as the sport's pound-for-pound king. Gilbert Burns, Jorge Masvidal, and Colby Covington all fell at his hands, but above all other things, Usman managed to completely change our perception of him last year, as he shed the quote-unquote boring fighter label that had followed him constantly through his initial rise. The Nigerian Nightmare really stepped it up in 2021, and for that reason, he is my Male Fighter of the Year. Fight of the Year. Next up, we have the Fight of the Year, a category that, if there's not one standout pick, does really boil down to personal preference, in a way that most categories do not. I love a good barn burner as much as the next man, but when it came to singling out my number 1 pick for this year, I couldn't help but side with a matchup that showcased some of the highest levels of MMA we've seen in some time. Hell, I think that Piotr Jan versus Corey Sandhagen was one of the most elite fights I've ever seen. It was thrilling, it was both subtle and completely in your face at the same time, and through his victory, the pressure cooker that is the interim champion Jan proved beyond any doubt that he is the best bantamweight fighter in the sport. I absolutely loved this fight. I was bobbing and weaving my head as I watched it, honestly. And as soon as it finished in real time, I pretty much knew there and then that it would take something completely out of this world to supplant it as my pick. MMA Channel of the Year. And finally, we come to perhaps the most important award of all. Will the defending champions of 2020 MMA Dive be able to hold on to their status as the single greatest, and some might say fastest growing MMA channel on the platform? Well, yes, they most certainly can. Congratulations guys, you knocked it out of the park. And that'll just about do it for our 2nd annual award show. Do be sure to give me some of your own picks in the comments section below. I know there's likely a few that you all disagree with. So with the end of year content finally out of the way, do keep an eye on your notification bell well because we're going to be upping our content levels as we move deeper into January. MMA returned to our screens last weekend with the truly excellent showcase between Giga Chikadze and the bout's victor Calvin Kattar, and MMA Dive is going to return to your regular diet along with it. So remember to subscribe, like the video, and check out the Patreon link in the description if you want to help support the channel. As always, thank you for watching.